Hey, good morning, y'all. Happy Monday. Josh's Severe Weather here to discuss our next major storm across the United States, starting out in California this week and spreading eastward into the eastern U.S. before the end of the week and affecting us in New England into the start of the weekend. I'm going to share my screen with you and show you what we are going to be talking about here. And I know the West is certainly getting battered, especially California. I'll talk about that a little bit more, but I also know that a lot of you are coming here looking at what's going to happen later this week. Now, we have continued to see a shift north and westward with where the forecast models are showing, generally speaking, where the core of our storm system will be. There's also a bit of a faster amount of timing coming. And as a result, we are going to see a lot more rain out of this and a lot less snow stateside. With the exception, I think, of the Great Lakes, the Canadian border states, and the Canadian Maritimes. So what looked like maybe about 4 or 5 days ago would be a more southern track. Models have continued to pound home the fact that low pressure systems that come out of the west are going to be cutting up into the Great Lakes. The change with this storm is that it is just not going to be cold enough for this to be a major snowfall for 95% of the country. However, we're not talking about zero snow either. And even where the wintry mix is, we could be in for a very challenging forecast. The other thing that I started talking about but haven't really gotten to nail down yet is the threat for severe weather and maybe even some tornadoes in parts of the South. If you've watched any of my videos here in the last couple of weeks, you'll know that I am predicting a very active tornado season, and that just doesn't wait until March or April down south. It started back in December, to be honest with you all, and will be continuing here in January, a very active storm track as we have a Pacific jet stream that is moving into the western US. So the area I'm most concerned about right now is once again Dixie Alley. So southeast Arkansas, northern Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama into central Georgia. And we will continue to monitor that as well. For the big cities, I know you guys really want to see snow, but unfortunately the storm track just does not make it so that will be the case. But nonetheless, it's going to be a disruptive storm. If you have plans to travel later Thursday, Friday, and maybe Saturday, do expect to have some snags here in the eastern United States. So let's talk about, I'm going to get back to that. I want to show you all Tropical Tidbits, great website by Levi here. And I'm going to show you the GFS model and so you can see what's going on. Now, of course, out west, we've got a big storm battering California with another wave of some very heavy rain and very heavy mountain snow. And this is going to continue to provide some rain that's needed to California, but there's always too much of a good thing. And unfortunately for Central California right now, a lot of folks are without power due to the wind we had with the last storm. And we've just got a lot more rain than what I think a lot of places can handle. So a very dangerous situation for some in the flood zones here in California. You'll see very heavy snow as well here in the Sierra Nevada. Great for the ski areas, but once it melts this spring, look out, Loretta. On the eastern United States, we did have what I would call a pretty miserable day yesterday in the Carolinas and Virginia. Cold rain. There was some icy precipitation up against the mountains. A little bit of light snow spreading through the mid-Atlantic states this morning, but really nothing too significant. Just keep an eye on it this morning. But that storm's going to be heading out, and what we will see is a milder trend as we get into Wednesday and Thursday. Not going to be a warm week, but certainly not a cold one either by our standards here in January. I've seen a lot of people raising the white flag about winter being over, and remember that meteorological winter goes from December 1st to February 28th, and it is still certainly possible in the northern U.S. to see winter weather even in April. So to do something like that prematurely, despite the fact that we've had some winter weather already in some areas, not everywhere, of course, I think would be premature. We're only on really week 5, week 6 of winter in what's a 3-month season. So I'm going to talk about some prospects for colder weather coming up, returning to the area by the end of January and into February. By the way, climatologically speaking, the highest amounts of snow across the Northeast occur in February, not December or January. And the reason for that is that we typically have an active southern jet stream as we start to transition more into a spring-like pattern, but at the same time, ocean temperatures off the Northeast coast are typically at their coldest in the month of February. So when you have colder ocean water and a more active jet stream, you have the higher likelihood of seeing snow. Every year is not going to be that way. I will promise you that. But to say that winter is over across the Northeast would be very premature. I would not be shocked to see a bigger storm coming this season. It's just not going to be for the next couple of weeks, at least snow. So anyway, we're tracking our storm here in the Southwest. This is Tuesday night and Wednesday. There's also a storm on the northern branch of the jet stream. So you have two storms here that'll merge into one. One across northern Minnesota. It'll be mild enough for a little bit of rain in the UP Mission, even the Keweenaw Peninsula Wednesday morning, with snow across the mountains. Then we start to see, as this low pressure moves into Missouri, Wednesday night, Thursday morning, a fetch off the Gulf of Mexico and a strengthening trough. So the two combined will produce a pretty sharp boundary between warmer air and colder air. So some snow on the cold side and maybe some stronger storms later Wednesday night, Thursday morning across the south. This storm track should look very familiar to those of you. It's a similar track to what we had with the big blizzard that hit right before Christmas in the Great Lakes, especially Buffalo. It is the track that cuts up through the eastern Great Lakes. We do have a lot of cold air in place over New England, but we see this mild air already cutting out ahead of it. This is basically the death signal for snow across the big cities of the Northeast, seeing a low track here. What you really want is something down here, which I know last week we were teased with some models showing that, but unfortunately they've changed their tune, which I talked about here on Saturday. So this low pressure tracks up to the Great Lakes. The big question mark is how far west does it go or how far east does it go? And that could be anywhere from just south of Chicago to as east as Erie, Pennsylvania. The difference is only a couple hundred miles, but makes a huge difference in what our projected weather could be. So we're still 3 days out. There's still chances that this will change, but the GFS model shows a quick change back to snow over the Great Lakes, especially Chicago and Western Michigan. The other models do not show that happening, though. They show a much more, I guess, a tamer solution when it comes to wintry weather on the backside. So again, in Chicago, Indiana, Michigan, places that I've seen a lot of you folks chime in about and ask about. This is definitely not a set in stone situation. This has still got some time to change, and I'll show you some differences. Thursday afternoon, though, we've got a lot of energy dipping down across the southern United States, front tracking through here. I am expecting some severe weather. With the fact that the trough is lifting this way rather than producing stronger winds down in here does, I think, limit our chance to see tornadoes, but I still think there could be a few. But nonetheless, I think some severe weather across especially parts of the Dixie Alley here on Thursday. Late Wednesday night in the Mississippi Valley, Thursday morning farther east, and Thursday afternoon, I think, is when we're at the apex of our severe outbreak from Mississippi up into eastern Tennessee, really southeastern Tennessee. When you get to the mountains, things start breaking up. And then later Thursday night, don't be shocked to have some rumbles of thunder and some locally strong winds over the Carolinas and northern Florida. But I don't think this is a huge severe weather outbreak by any stretch. Nothing like the 14 tornado watches we started 14 watches, 13 of which were tornado watches that we started off with last week. But notice this low pressure system pulls milder air all the way up the eastern seaboard into Canada. So Toronto is dealing with rain. Montreal sees a wintry mix going to rain. And what I'm watching here off the East Coast is with a trough digging this strongly, maybe a second area of low pressure forming and moving up the East Coast. At this point, most of the storm is off the coast at that point, but it would enhance rainfall over New England and could mean heavy snow on the backside of the storm if we have a second low that tracks up through here. Could be a snow special here in northern New England, eastern St. Lawrence Valley. For the big cities, though, the dry air rushes in, and I don't think we're seeing anything more than just a few minor snowflakes here Saturday morning. It's going to be windy and colder, but I think primarily dry by the time we get into the weekend here across the big cities. The mountains will pick up some pretty good snow, though. It's going to be brutally cold and windy. Places like Mount Mitchell, Mount LeConte, the usual spot, Snowshoe. We're going to see snow, which will help the resorts out here if you're planning to go skiing this weekend. Notice these tighter isobars of pressure. Those indicate stronger winds, and also some lake effect or lake enhanced snow, but we're not talking about the kind of lake effect that we saw here right around Christmas time. The GFS dries us out by Sunday across the entire east, then it warms right back up, and then our familiar storm track returns next week, where again, this will change, but notice we're looking at, rather than storms coming up the East Coast, they are cutting up from California through the Central Rockies and Plains and then up into the Great Lakes. This is this time next week. Here's the next one later next week. And here's the next one, maybe a little bit farther east at that point. But again, no promises. But still no prospects for any big snow across the Northeast, certainly not the Carolinas or the Deep South. What we see are continued storm tracks over the Ohio Valley and more severe weather outbreak potentially for next week. Even though that's more than a week off. So again, the certainty level is not super high. Again, we're looking at the potential to see a lot of rain and more severe weather in places that are probably saying, I'm done. This is winter. I'm done with the rain. I'm done with the tornado warnings. I'm done with the severe weather. Make it stop, please. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to stop anytime soon, at least for the next 2 weeks. After that, we could see maybe some colder, drier air coming down into the east, but the certainty level at this point is super low. I know there's other internet YouTubers out there that are screaming about polar vortex and colder and this and that. In my professional opinion, doing this for 20 years, as much as I want to get my name and brand out there, I would rather be 100% correct and we get nothing than to just go out there, cry wolf about everything, and it just blow up in my face. Because that's probably what's going to happen here for a lot of these folks that are talking about crazy things like polar vortex and major snow and sudden stratospheric warming events, which lead to, of course, polar vortex disruptions. I don't think, though, in the month of January, we see anything like we saw back in December, where we have major cold, record cold in some places, power outages, demand. I don't think it's going to be that sort of month. I think by the time January is over, we're looking mild for 2/3 of the country. We're looking very wet and very snowy for the West, especially California. We're looking wet for the eastern seaboard, and we're looking at 3 to 4 severe weather outbreaks in the Southeast. And I will stand by that forecast because I think it's going to verify. So there. All right, so let's take a look at details. The GFS ensemble, I'll show you guys the upper air patterns. These are departures from normal, not necessarily colder air, but stronger than average troughs. You can see one trough leaves the East Coast today. This is Monday into Tuesday. The next one moves into California. There's one right behind it. And as long as we see these powerful troughs pushing into the eastern U.S., the Pineapple Expresses, the atmospheric rivers, we've got no way of allowing cold air to drop south, because what will happen is these storm systems, as they barrel into the west, the jet stream intensifies and the subtropical part of the jet takes over. The polar jet remains kind of locked up to the north and west. You can kind of see this through the weather pattern. So the southern branch takes over, which is what you would typically see in the springtime, why we see severe weather. A ridge kind of taking over into the east here, middle of this week. And then our storm system, which a few days ago models were showing much farther south. Now the upper low is up across the Great Lakes and lifting out. We may see a secondary piece forming, but it'll be off the coast on Saturday rather than over the southeast, which is what you want to see if you want a big East Coast storm. It's already kind of off the coast. Right behind it, another ridge moves in and then another trough to the west. This pattern repeats itself next week. This is Sunday. Big trough in the west. This should look very familiar. It looks just like this past Sunday did yesterday. And then as we head into next week, we notice a huge ridge taking over the eastern United States, trough in the west. And once again, not a really strong signal for anything but heavy rain and severe weather down here. Storms cutting up through the Great Lakes and more unwanted rainfall here in the western United States. It does look like, as we get to about the 22nd, 23rd, we see some shifting in the weather tracks. And rather than there being a trough in the west, we start to see some ridging here. That will allow maybe some cooler weather and maybe some shifts coming into the plains around the 22nd or 23rd. But here's the polar vortex here. There's no intrusion of truly cold air by the 23rd and 24th. It does get colder, yes. This pattern kind of leads to more favorable snow in the northern United States, but not necessarily for the east. Notice we still have above average heights and a ridge centered off the east coast. And until that thing budges and gets trapped over Greenland and the 50-50 region here, 50 north, 50 west, the coordinates, until we see an upper low here, we just don't have any cold wrapping in and producing the ingredients that could produce an East Coast storm. Yes, it gets colder. I mean, it was cold yesterday for us in the East, was it not? It was raining. It was miserable. Where I live in Raleigh, it was like 39 degrees. But it wasn't the kind of cold that's going to produce a winter storm, not a sustainable one. So moving on, I want to get into some more details here. We'll look at California over the next few days. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. You guys know what's coming out west. I can't say it's great news unless you're a ski resort, but just getting pounded here, storm after storm here. This is at the end of the week. We do get a break Thursday and Friday, thank goodness, but the next storm moves in over the weekend, and it gets cooler, and then it just repeats itself. Here's next week around this time. And then finally, as we get into the middle of next week, Southern Cal will start to dry out overall, but Northern Cal remains very unsettled. And then as we get to next weekend, things do look like they're going to slowly start to improve, and that is due to the ridge starting to build into southwestern California. Storm totals, we're looking at extreme amounts of rain here. This is 5-day rainfall. Amounts of 5 to 10 inches of rain, very heavy snow expected. There's more coming over the weekend. Southern Cal could see a couple inches of rain, and Northern Cal gets wet once again this time next week with another big storm, maybe up to 8 to 10 inches of rain. And then notice things do slowly let up where we get into a less unsettled pattern. Not necessarily going to be 100% dry in California, but we see the fire hose shifting from the Bay Area up into Oregon by the 23rd and 24th on the GFS. Snow totals, using the Kashera ratio, which is usually too high, but gives you a handle on what's coming, we see amounts of perhaps 12 to 13 feet of snow across the Sierra Nevada here this week, and then more coming next week with 2 to 3 times what we would typically get in your average wintertime here. So very good for the ski areas, but when this all melts in the spring, it's look out Loretta. All right, so let's take a look at the Canadian model here. I'm going to show you guys kind of the nation here and the whole northern parts of America. And you can see the storm track. Here's boom, 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 3 big storms. Count them here moving into the west. Notice the Ohio Valley, we see storm track coming right up into the eastern Great Lakes. It allows enough warm air to come up. Here's the green lines. That produce rain all the way into New York State and coastal New England here on Friday. And the pattern repeats itself. You can see with this upper low kind of cutting off in eastern North Carolina, it'll be dry east of the Appalachians, but this can produce an intensifying storm, not really a nor'easter, but a storm that comes up the East Coast, coastal low, and that produces another wave of heavy rain. As the cold air comes down, you can see it kind of diving into Quebec here on Saturday. This rain is likely to change over to snow. In between, though, we could have a zone of mixed icy precipitation, and that could include Bangor, Maine, maybe Caribou, and all the way up into Newfoundland, the eastern St. Lawrence Valley. So this is going to be a nasty storm for Atlantic Canada, with very heavy snow falling across the interior of Atlantic Canada. For those of you that may be watching from there. This is the GFS model. I'll zoom into the east. You can see our storm leaves the area. Next storm system comes in on Thursday and Friday, and the GFS does have significant snow over northern Illinois into western and northern Michigan. The other models don't show this, so it's something I'm going to be watching for you guys. They all do show that cold air wrapping in, and Thursday night, Friday morning snow, maybe even in middle Tennessee and Kentucky, but primarily across the mountains, the central and southern Appalachians as that cold air pours in. We haven't had snow here in a while, but it is coming back Thursday night into Friday and then letting up Saturday, it looks like. Let's talk about the Storm Prediction Center and our outlook for thunderstorms, the West Coast today. Tomorrow, again, Southern Cal will see thunderstorms. So interestingly, Southern Cal could have thunderstorms here for the national championship game, especially after the game ends. Fortunately, it's inside. And then as our storm starts to gather steam Wednesday evening, we do have a marginal risk for severe weather over the Arklatex and getting into the Mississippi Valley states later Wednesday night. As we get into day 4, that is Thursday, the Storm Prediction Center does have a slight to moderate risk for severe weather, a 15% chance over Alabama and Georgia. I do think there's a possibility this could extend a little farther west if the storm is a little slower. But right now, due to the heating of the day and stronger winds aloft, I think Alabama and Georgia stand the best chance of getting severe weather. The western Florida panhandle could be involved in this as well. When you get into the Carolinas, that chance is below 15%, so they don't have it outlooked. And then as we get to Friday and Friday night, the predictability for severe weather is too low. I think by then, maybe it's northern and central Florida, and it's a marginal risk at that point. Temperatures are warming up for us here this week. We see returning to the 50s, 60s, and 70s in the south. It'll still be below freezing in New England. But as we get into Friday, there's no sign that there'll be snow across this area, despite some maps you may have seen from a major weather outlet over the weekend. It's just way too warm. We're talking about 50s here in Albany, New York, and Boston, Massachusetts, maybe even 60 in South Jersey on Thursday into Friday. So some very mild air coming up the East Coast. Here's the cold air, though, wrapping in behind it, and we drop below freezing for highs here in the mountains. So much colder look to next Saturday, where areas that were in the 60s and 70s will be in the 30s and 40s Friday and Saturday. Even Florida's getting colder, and by Sunday, we're looking at highs in the 50s and 60s. Next week, though, it warms right back up. You can see the yellows returning here. It may be chilly in the Appalachians, but warming back up into the 50s and 60s ahead of our next storm here in the Carolinas. Rainfall totals, this is what the National Blend of Models is showing, 1 to 2 inches of rain. The highest amounts are going to be off the coast and then spreading up into New England. We may see 2 to 3 inches of rain. But we're not looking at a widespread flood. There could be some flash flooding in this region, but generally speaking, not a widespread flood. Snow totals from the GFS, though, I did talk about the Chicagoland area, and you can see there's an area where maybe some heavier snow falls through Michigan, but most of the snow from this storm is up across New England, where we see 6 to 12 inches of snow in northern New England and into Canada. The European does not agree, though. It has some lighter snow in Chicago and maybe a band of heavier snow around Kansas City and just to the north of St. Louis, and heavier snow tracking across this part of Canada. So maybe not Toronto, but just north and west of you, heavy snow. So there will be a big snow for some of you guys. It's just not going to be most of you, unfortunately. In the mountains, though, we see the potential 3 to 6 inches in the Smokies and in the West Virginia Appalachians, but much less when we get into the Blue Ridge. The Canadian shows lighter amounts here, but still significant snowfall in the mountains, several inches, but does not show really much snow in the plains and Midwest, maybe a couple inches, more scattered towards Lake Erie. But again, agrees that we're looking at a foot or more of snow here over the St. Lawrence Valley and maybe parts of northern Maine. So primarily a rainstorm here, but there will be some snow involved as well. Not really a big ice maker until you get to Atlantic Canada. Let's look into the longer range really quickly. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but the climate forecast system, you see the warmth that's taken over most of the country, the cool weather over the southwest, and it's been chilly in the southeast with respect to average, but it does moderate. This is not a sign of any takeover of any kind of cold. We see some fleeting cold coming through next week just behind our storm system, but there's no big blast of Arctic air like we saw here in the middle to second part of December. The general trend is cooler as we head to February, but this is not a big blast of Arctic air overtaking the country. We're talking on average 5 to 10 degrees below average, so there will be drier shots of cold coming down. However, on the backside of this cold, when it starts moderating, we do have to watch the eastern seaboard. We're probably talking about first and second week of February for a climbing chance for maybe some form of winter weather. But it's going to be warming right back up before the next cold outbreak comes. So I think February is cooler. I think overall, looking at this climate forecast system, the bias may be too cold. I think as a whole, the month is going to be on the cooler side, but I don't think it's going to be as cold as what the CFS is showing. Now, I could be wrong. It is a month out, but that's just kind of what I'm thinking. And you can see that looking at the upper level pattern, we see kind of the polar vortex stays up here around Baffin Bay. And what happens is the trough that has been pounding California generally shifts eastward into Texas and Oklahoma and stays there at the end of the month of January and then lifts north and east. So we do have colder air that's allowed to come down into the Great Lakes. So if you're in the lake effect areas here, February, you could be in for more lake effect outbreaks in places like Buffalo or just to your south, as the lake is not going to freeze over with this kind of mild air we have this month. Big ridge in Alaska, so we do have colder air here in eastern Canada that is allowed to invade the country. However, I want to see, for a major outbreak like we saw in December, I want to see this stretching a lot farther south and west, and it doesn't look like that happens. So the videos out there talking about extreme cold, I think are going to end up regretting it, to be honest with you. I'm not going to speak for other folks. That's not I'll stay in my own lane, but I just don't think it's really going to be cold enough for us to see any kind of significant cold waves that last more than a few days. In fact, you guys can see already by the second week of February, the trough is already starting to retrograde, and we start to see ridging off of the Atlantic take back over in the south and east. And this is the area we're going to have to watch again right around Mardi Gras, but Valentine's Day for more severe weather in parts of the south. Rain totals from the climate forecast system. You can see it's awfully wet from California to the northeast. This is our Pineapple Express here, right on through the middle of January. And then Not quite as wet as we get later into January, but the central part of the country is targeted for winter storms. The south stays wet. The east isn't quite as wet, but still on the wet side. Then, as we get into February, we see a drier solution at the change of the month. So the colder air comes in and it gets drier. So this favors big storms across the northern part of the country and the Rockies. Not nearly as much precipitation in the deep south. We kind of get a drier pattern here, but it will be colder. But notice that the climate forecast system tries to make things more active here by the first weekend of February. So that's what I'll be watching for you guys. I think maybe some better chances for winter weather in here by February, but probably also a better chance for severe weather as well towards Valentine's Day. So I went a little long there, folks. I hope that's okay with you. I'll have more updates for you on a daily basis, but if you could like and subscribe my YouTube channel, I very much appreciate your time. And I really am glad you joined me here today. Apologize for rambling on, had a little bit of coffee here, but real quick, I just want to thank you all for being subscribers or first-time visitors. I have seen growth that I very much envisioned. I believe that I've been called to grow this channel and to not only talk about what matters when it comes to weather, but also to talk about what matters when it comes to God and what I truly believe. And that is that the Lord our God is with us, and He's called us. Each has called us according to His purpose. It's Romans 8:28. I am a Christian. I know some of you are, some of you aren't, and that's okay. But for those of you that are believers, I want to encourage you and just state that we've been blessed. My church and I were doing a Bible class right now talking about the Beatitudes, Matthew 5. And I just want to read that real quick and remind you guys that these are not commandments from Jesus Christ. They are gospel. They are blessings, not rules, not laws, but blessings. So Jesus, when He saw the crowds, went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to Him, and He began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they are filled." And that is me. I'm hungry for righteousness. I'm not there to be holier than thou. That's not my role. That's not why I do this. It's to give God the glory and to seek Him. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. If you're a praying person and you want to be shown mercy, that is the way to do it. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And here's the last one, and this is the one that'll slap you in the face if you are a believer. Matthew 5:11-12. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. And by me, that's Jesus Christ. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. If you are a true believer in Jesus Christ, you are being encouraged to use God as a way of seeking that reward in heaven through Jesus Christ. John 3:16, eternal life. But do not expect to just get there. There's no easy way to heaven. You're going to get smacked around. You're going to be insulted, persecuted. There are people right now, like my friend Ross's brother in Ukraine, fighting for Christianity and fighting for the freedoms of people that are being oppressed. And I pray for these people every day. Ross's brother Stuart is dealing with some health challenges. If you could pray for him, I really would appreciate that. I know Ross would as well. He and I have been great friends for over a dozen years now. But there are people that, we've got the freedoms here in America and even in Canada and other places you may be watching. We're free to believe what we want to believe. That doesn't mean people are going to agree with you. You'll be insulted. But there's people in parts of Europe, parts of Asia, parts of Africa, other countries, where if you have those beliefs, you can be killed for it. And it just goes to show that you're blessed no matter what you do, even if you get killed. It sounds really terrible. Gosh, I mean, it's scary sounding, but there are rewards in heaven. And I'm doing this channel knowing that I'm just very much blessed to be able to do that, but I know people will be insulting. I know they're going to say that God is producing all these storms and all this bad weather and pouring rain on California for political reasons, whatever, religious religions. I get it. But God didn't promise that there would be more storms In fact, after the great flood in Genesis, he promised that that would no longer happen. What's happening is you've got attacks from Satan. You've got people that are turning against God. You've got people that are saying it's my way or the highway. And what happens there is that you see more divide, you see more uprising, you see more persecution because of all the people that are turning away from God. And I just want to encourage you to see the light in those situations. You know, natural disasters are no joke. Climate change is no joke. Whether or not God produced it, I think that is not to be proven here. In fact, I believe that personally, Jesus is coming, and it's up to us to not go with the flow, but to see Jesus Christ and to see that there is forgiveness and to see that there's grace and mercy coming, and that you are blessed. Not a law, not a commandment. You're not commanded, you're blessed. And so I thank you for, if you had a few minutes and stuck around with me, I thank you for that, because man, it just brings tingles to my spine just to say that. You know, for 30 years of my life, I was not a Christian. I was one of those people that said, okay, yeah, there's no God. You people are fools, blah, blah, blah. I was persecuting people. I was being a jerk. I was narrow-minded. But through the gift of God, I was able to change, to have a change of heart and to be transformed. The Beatitudes are there to transform you to be a blessed Christian, not to suffer any longer. So I encourage you to get in the Word, and I would appreciate and covet your prayers for me and for this channel as it grows. It's been a wonderful 5-6 weeks. I continue to see a lot of growth. If you're not a believer, that's okay too. Not going to judge you for it. That's not up to me. But I just encourage you that if you are struggling with your faith or you want to see something change, you're going to have to make some changes. And I encourage you maybe to spend a little bit of time and just seek like I did. So I appreciate y'all's time. God bless you. Have a wonderful day. And if you need me to pray for you, I'm happy to do that. God bless.